What would you feel when someone punched you or cursed at you? Or what would you feel when someone said, "You did a great job," or "I'm proud of you"? In this video, we will talk about emotions and feelings and how these affect our communication. We will examine first the components of emotions, the factors that influence emotions, and some helpful ways for communicating emotions effectively. Are you feeling excited? Let's begin. We may express emotions verbally or non-verbally. However, even if we experience and express what we feel, there are times that we couldn't identify our feelings or express an appropriate emotion. To be a good communicator, we need to recognize well our emotions and know how our emotions work so that we can express them better. Why? Because our self-concept and perception are strongly influenced by our emotions. So, what is an emotion? According to Verdeber and McGeorge, an emotion is a positive or negative sensation we experience as a result of perceiving something in our environment that supports or threatens our well-being, which result in uncontrolled physical reactions expressed through verbal and nonverbal behaviors that motivate us to take action. In other words, it is a reaction to what we perceive in the environment expressed through verbal or nonverbal communication. To further understand emotions, let's look at Morse's components of emotions. According to Morse, there are 5 components of emotions: the feeling component, somatic component, motor component, cognitive component, and motivational component. The feeling component is our positive or negative reactions. These are our basic emotions such as happiness, anger, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, contentment, pride, and so on. The somatic component is the physical experience of that feeling, such as blushing when you're kinikilig or feeling chills when you are scared. The motor component is the expression of emotion through verbal and nonverbal behaviors, such as being mali-mali or saying something when you get shocked, or peeing in your pants when you get so nervous. The feeling, somatic, and motor components of emotions are what people usually see or consider as emotions. However, emotions are also beyond our feelings and how we express those feelings. So let's look at the rest of the components. The cognitive component is the meaning or interpretation of the emotion-provoking event. This means that we become emotional when we perceive that there is something that is happening in our environment that supports or threatens our well-being. For example, you're in a room full of serious people, and then someone cracked a joke, and everyone laughed. You suddenly felt at ease, and the tension was gone. And the last component is the motivational component, or the action that emotion encourages us to take. This means that the feelings we experience affect how we interact in that particular moment. You might be annoyed at someone, but you may or may not choose to show it to that person. We now have an idea of what emotions are and how emotions work. So now let's go to factors that influence emotions. The first factor is physiological. We experience emotion when external stimuli cause physiological changes in our bodies. Emotions start with perception, and that perception or external stimuli change our physiology, resulting to the feeling, somatic, and motor components of emotions. The second factor is perceptual. Our subjective perceptions shape what external phenomena mean to us. Because of that, we act on the basis of our interpretation of phenomena. In other words, how we view things leads us to what we feel or the emotions that we express. For example, we may see this pandemic as the end of the world, and that perception will lead us to an emotion where we feel scared. And finally, the last factor is cultural. Our culture and the social groups we belong are considered as emotional communities because they teach us how to understand and express emotions. The society and communities in which we live influence our beliefs about which emotions are good or bad, which emotions we should express or repress, and with whom we can appropriately communicate which emotions. The Filipino concept of hiya or shame or shyness is already understood by most young Filipinos. That is why the emotion of hiya is more emphasized in Filipinos than in other societies, particularly Western societies. And finally, here are some guidelines for communicating emotions effectively. First is to identify our emotions or know what we feel. This is not always easy as sometimes our emotions have complex mixtures. An example of this is getting excited and at the same time getting nervous. We get confused on what we are feeling. So what we will do first is to identify the dominant feeling in that particular moment. Doing this allows you to communicate clearly to others what is most important in your emotional state. You might feel nervous at first, but then as you let yourself feel nervous, you allow excitement to come after the initial feeling. Just as we learn how to ignore our feelings, we can also teach ourselves to notice and express them by identifying our emotions. Next is to choose whether and how to express emotions. You may express your emotions to other people, or you may keep it to yourself. Having trouble with expressing emotions? You may first evaluate your current state, then decide to whom you want to express your emotions or your feelings, and then select an appropriate time to discuss your feelings. And finally, select an appropriate setting for discussing feelings. Another way is to monitor your self-talk or self-disclosure. This helps us process our emotions or even to experience emotions without actually conversing with anyone. The thoughts we communicate to ourselves affect what happens in our lives, especially in our interactions. Because of that, self-talk helps us to manage our feelings effectively by monitoring our responses, motivations, and even our perceptions behind those emotions. Another way is to adopt a rational emotive approach to feelings. The rational emotive approach uses a rational thinking and self-talk to challenge the debilitating thoughts about emotions that undermine healthy self-concepts and relationships. How? By monitoring our emotional reactions to events and experiences that distress us. By identifying the events and situations to which we have unpleasant responses, by listening to what's happening in our minds, and using self-talk to challenge the debilitating fallacies. And finally, in order to communicate our emotions effectively, we must respond sensitively when others communicate emotions. Being mindful of our emotions is only half of the process. We need to be mindful too of the emotions communicated by other people. You can show it through listening and by being supportive. Humans are emotional creatures, and emotions affect how we think, how we perceive, how we see ourselves, and how we communicate. If we don't manage or communicate our emotions effectively, we wouldn't be able to make rational decisions, or it may ruin our relationships with people. Some suppressed and excluded their emotions. But the best thing to do is to complement emotions to our existence, to find the balance between logic and emotion so we can be a better person and be the best communicator.